Two men lived on the same prison range for years, separated by steel doors and silence. Most inmates knew their names only from rumors. Staff rarely spoke about them. Their crimes had once dominated headlines across the United States. Yet inside these walls they became nearly invisible. The public forgot them, but the system never did. Both had built criminal histories that stretched across decades, involving violence, organized crime, and complex investigations. Their cases reshaped how federal authorities handled dangerous offenders. Few documentaries explore the stories behind inmates like these. Before we continue, subscribe for more documentaries. In the American federal prison system, some inmates remain widely known, while others with equally significant criminal histories gradually fade from public attention over time. Facilities designed for the most serious offenders eventually became the final destination for many of these individuals, particularly within the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado. Often called ADX Florence, the prison earned a reputation as the most secure federal prison in the United States, housing inmates considered too dangerous for standard federal facilities. Many prisoners held there were involved in organized crime, large-scale violence, terrorism investigations, or repeated attacks while incarcerated in other federal institutions. Yet, among the well-known figures housed in the system, a number of inmates with extensive criminal histories received far less public attention despite the scale of their cases. One example is Thomas Silverstein, whose name is sometimes mentioned in discussions about extreme prison conditions but whose earlier criminal history is less widely examined. Silverstein began his criminal activity through armed robberies during the 1970s, eventually becoming connected to violent prison gang activity within the federal correctional system. While incarcerated, he became associated with the Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist prison gang that expanded influence across multiple federal institutions during that period. Investigators later linked the group to numerous violent incidents inside prisons, including assaults and organized attacks against other inmates. Silverstein's reputation within the federal system changed dramatically after a series of violent incidents occurred during his incarceration. In 1983, Correctional Officer Merle Klutz was killed at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, an event that triggered major changes in federal prison security policies. Authorities determined Silverstein had carried out the attack while already serving a sentence for earlier crimes connected to armed robbery. The incident forced federal officials to reevaluate how high-risk inmates were controlled inside maximum security facilities. But that case was not the only event that shaped Silverstein's legacy within the prison system. Earlier that same year, another inmate connected to a rival prison group had been killed inside the same institution. Federal investigators believed the killing was part of ongoing conflicts between prison gangs operating within federal facilities during the early 1980s. As a result, Silverstein became one of the most tightly controlled inmates in the federal prison system. He spent decades in solitary confinement under what prison officials described as the most restrictive incarceration conditions in the country. His confinement later became a focal point in debates about long-term isolation and the psychological effects of extreme prison control measures. But Silverstein was not the only lesser-known inmate whose criminal history had far-reaching consequences inside federal prisons. Another example emerged from the long-running investigations into organized crime during the late 20th century. Robert Mazurko, sometimes overshadowed by higher-ranking mafia figures, had been involved in organized criminal activity connected to the Chicago outfit. Federal authorities linked him to racketeering operations that involved gambling networks, extortion schemes, and organized financial crimes. Investigations into the outfit during the 1980s and early 1990s uncovered a network of associates responsible for enforcing criminal operations across multiple states. While the leaders of the organization often received most of the public attention, investigators emphasized that lower-profile members played critical roles in maintaining the structure. Mazurko was eventually convicted on charges connected to racketeering and organized crime operations under federal prosecution. These prosecutions were part of broader federal efforts using the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, commonly known as RICO. The law allowed prosecutors to charge individuals not only for specific crimes but also for participating in criminal organizations. This legal strategy significantly changed how organized crime cases were handled in the United States. As federal authorities continued dismantling organized crime networks, many individuals with deep criminal histories entered the federal prison system. Some were transferred to high-security institutions after investigators determined they continued directing criminal activity even while incarcerated. Others were relocated because of their influence within prison gangs or organized crime networks operating behind bars. In certain cases, inmates who had once held powerful positions outside prison gradually became obscure figures once confined within highly restrictive facilities. Yet their histories remained important to understanding how federal law enforcement approached complex criminal organizations. And in several cases, those histories continued to affect prison security decisions years after their convictions. Few people outside the justice system realized how much influence some of these lesser-known inmates once held. What happened next inside the federal prison system would reveal why their stories still matter today. Inside the federal prison system, certain inmates continued to influence security policies long after their convictions, even when their names rarely appeared in public discussion. One such inmate was Clayton Fountain, a member of the Aryan Brotherhood, whose actions during incarceration would later shape how prison officials managed violent offenders. Fountain originally entered the federal system after being convicted for armed robbery and firearms offenses connected to crimes committed during the early 1970s. Over time, investigators identified him as an influential figure within the Aryan Brotherhood, a prison gang involved in organized violence inside several federal penitentiaries. His reputation grew after a series of violent incidents occurred within prison facilities, where gang rivalries frequently escalated into coordinated attacks. In 1974, Correctional Officer Fred Alt was killed at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, during an attempted escape involving several inmates. Federal authorities later determined that Clayton Fountain had played a central role in the incident. The killing shocked federal prison officials and intensified concerns about the ability of organized prison gangs to coordinate violence even within maximum security environments. As a result, Fountain was placed under extremely restrictive confinement conditions designed to prevent further contact with other inmates. The case contributed to growing pressure within the Federal Bureau of Prisons to reevaluate how the most dangerous inmates were housed and controlled. But Fountain's case was only one example among several inmates whose histories forced major policy decisions inside the federal prison system. Another lesser-known inmate with a significant criminal background was Richard McNair, whose case became widely discussed among prison security professionals. McNair had been convicted of murder in North Dakota in 1987 after killing Jerome Thies, a local grain elevator manager, during a robbery attempt. After his conviction, he was placed within the federal prison system, where his behavior quickly attracted attention from correctional staff. McNair became known not only for his crime, but also for multiple escape attempts that demonstrated unusual planning and patience. In 1992, he escaped from the North Dakota State Penitentiary by crawling through an air duct system but was later recaptured. Several years later, he carried out another escape while assigned to a federal halfway house. Authorities eventually located him again, but the incident exposed weaknesses in certain prison supervision procedures. The most widely discussed escape occurred in 2006 while McNair was incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary in Pollock, Louisiana. Using materials available in the prison workshop, he constructed a special container designed to resemble a package prepared for shipping. McNair placed himself inside the crate, which was then transported outside the prison facility as part of routine delivery operations. For several hours, prison staff believed the shipment was part of normal outgoing cargo. By the time authorities realized what had happened, McNair had already left the prison grounds. The escape triggered a nationwide search involving federal and international law enforcement agencies. For more than a year, he managed to avoid capture while traveling across multiple locations under false identities. Eventually, in 2007, Canadian police officers stopped him during a routine check near Campbellton, New Brunswick. After verifying his identity, authorities returned McNair to the United States to continue serving his sentence. His case prompted federal prison officials to review shipping procedures, facility inspections, and workshop supervision practices. Security changes were implemented in several institutions to prevent similar escape methods from being attempted again. Stories like these demonstrate how lesser-known inmates sometimes shaped the evolution of prison security without becoming widely recognized outside correctional circles. Their actions influenced policies, facility designs, and daily procedures inside some of the most controlled environments in the United States. For correctional staff, these cases became reminders that even highly restrictive institutions must constantly adapt to new risks. And although many of these inmates disappeared from public memory, their impact on prison operations remains significant for decades. If this story kept you watching, the next one will stay with you even longer. Subscribe for more real prison documentaries.